Good morning, brother Mfundishis. It's my pleasure to be here in your very, very beautiful home. Um, I want to talk a little bit about your background and your history. Tell us a little bit about yourself and something about these beautiful, I mean, awesomely beautiful African. They're not just African masks. They represent African history and African culture and legacy, and we learn a lot about our ancestors. But first, let's learn a little bit about you.
Well, I'm a relatively simple man, you know. My father and my lineage goes back to Tanzania, East Africa,
Hmm.
and so we're a lineage of chiefs and priests. Um, so from about 10 years old here in America, I've been training, and learning as much as I can. But I didn't really get conscious until I was about 14 years old. I belonged to the Organization of Afro-American Unity. That's where I met El Haj Malik, El Shabazz, Malcolm X, and I became a member of the youth organization of Afro-American Unity. And then later I met Balozi Zaid Mohammed, who introduced me to Mfundisi Maasi and Malana Karenga and Amiri Baraka. And so that was my background, So I worked with CFUN, Committee for Unified Newark, helping elect the first black mayor in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey. I went to college at Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia.
What'd you study in?
I was an architect engineer in history.
Mm.
So that was my background. I went as an engineer, you know.
Hmm. Did you get a degree?
Surely, from Norfolk State, I got a degree in history and in engineering. And then I went on to Rutgers Graduate School and got a master's at Rutgers and went to University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, received another master's degree, then came back and did another master's degree dealing with ancient Egyptian history, chematology. Um, so,
You also have a PhD in
and I have a PhD, this also in anthropology and history.
anthropology and history.
Right.
Oh,
So,
okay.
in 1980, let me get the years right. I worked as a teacher. Actually, I was the first full instructor of Nieti Educational Institute, an independent private black institution in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And for graduation, Brother Dr. Charles Gray was the founder of that school, Nieti Educational Institute. And for graduation, since I was the history teacher, we brought in Dr. Ben. And I had, since I was the history teacher and I was teaching Kiswahili and things like that, and we had a fantastic staff. Professor Kasahun, who's the head of Black Sea Press and all of that, was we were colleagues at Rutgers University. And so we brought Dr. Ben in as a keynote speaker, and I saw his video because I had to read it, and I said, "Oh, this is somebody I need to know." So in 1981, I made my first trip to Egypt with Dr. Ben. But this was in the 1970s when I first was introduced to Dr. Ben. So I made 5 trips to Egypt with Dr. Ben. That also led me to go deeper into my history because I was just studying all of Africa. When I met Dr. Ben, it allowed me to concentrate on ancient Kemet.
Hmm.
So, I want to give Dr. Ben, his kudos.
Great. Now, I don't know if you want to talk about your martial arts experience before we deal with this, but there's a connection here. So, give me the connection between your martial arts discipline as a teacher, a competitor. In fact, a world competitor and champion. So, talk to us a little bit about the two and the
Well, okay.
connection.
Yes, well, again, my martial arts started in 1974, 1964 is when I first started, and under my Mfundisi Maasi, and I took Bando, Burmese boxing first. And I trained with Bando all the way till I went to college. And when I graduated from college in 71, I got into Chinese Shaolin Kung Fu. And I matriculated up into an 8th degree master uh, became 3 times national champion in Shaolin Kung Fu. Got a free trip to China. There I was awarded my 8th degree. I was a 7th degree before I went. I came back and I was into the African martial arts starting around 1980. And then by 1985, I was awarded Malanga, that's master in the African martial arts. And I took 3 more world championships and became Mfundishi in 1992, which is great GrandMaster. My trips to Africa, myself and several other people, I made sure that I was studying. Every time I'd go to an African country, I wanted to know what was your indigenous arts. So I learned grappling, from Ghana, from Senegal, from Benin. I traveled to Mali. I went inside. I did hand-to-hand grappling in Sudan.
What is grappling?
Dinka.
What is grappling? Hand-to-hand grappling?
It's today what they would actually call mixed martial arts. It's like wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo, throws, holds, locks. We are the creators of that. Before there was a China, a Japan. The arts in Africa, you have to understand, the Japanese just got to Japan about 2,000 years. Africa already, our arts was over 100,000 years old. Organized art. In ancient Kemet, you can see the friezes on the wall of grappling techniques, throws, locks, holds. You can see the foundation of yoga, all those things. You see, what I learned in Africa is that all this was connected. The meditation, the yoga, the martial, well, we call it the Manchu arts, because Manchu was the patron, the nature of war based upon Ma'at. Europeans call it martial based upon their god, who was a killer. So we call our art the Manchu arts. And you can see Manchu Hotep was the reunifier of the second golden age in ancient Kemet. And Manchu was depicted by a great falcon, an eagle like Haru. All right, so that's what we do. I do the Manchu arts. Okay, and Kupagana and Gumi is part of that. But people only know martial arts, so I have to make a reference there so that they know exactly what you was doing. One of the things when we were going through our initiation, when I became a great spiritual high priest in ancient Kemet, and I want to make this, before I go into that, I want to make this statement, is that the prototype of the warrior priest is totally African. When we see the Buddhist monk, when we see the Tibetan Lama, when we see Shaolin priest, when we see all that pattern comes from ancient Kemet. In the Kemet temples, in the morning, you adorned Ra, you did your prayer, meditation, and yoga postures. And then you went into the Manchu arts, the warrior art. And then in the evening, you practice your craft. So that's what was done among the Buddhists, and all of those temples you see were imitating. Now, they shaved their heads bald because they saw some of the priests bald. But all the priests in Kemet were not bald. Wild priests were bald, and some priests, but priests had locks, and priests were bald. So, in ancient Kemet. But that's the prototype of all of throughout Asia, of the warrior, the spiritual warrior monk and all of that came from ancient Kemet. One of the things we had to do, here in the background, you'll see a real leopard skin. Well, when I became a high priest, you couldn't go to Macy's and buy a leopard skin. You had to go out to prove yourself that you were really this warrior. You had to go out. So myself and 2 others, a group of 3 of us, went out and we actually tracked down and trapped the leopard, and we had to kill it with our own hands. No guns, only with spears and knives and sword. And so this is my particular leopard skin that I wear at particular ceremonies. And so it was cured and done all on the African continent. And then I just brought it back to America. So when I do ceremonies and things of that nature, I actually wear this particular leopard skin that was actually done with my own hands.
Wonderful.
Okay. And then you'll see a list of different masks that you will see up on the wall. And as I would travel to each of the countries, I've been to, again, over 24 countries on the African continent. training with the martial arts, understanding the spiritual science, I would gather these masks up and bring them back. So they all have some significant meaning, you know, like even from the Benin lost wax, bronze sculpture, the Dogon pieces that you see up top here. I had the privilege of traveling with, excuse me. Okay.
You were saying you traveled
Yeah.
with Asa?
So I had that, yeah, the privilege of traveling with Asa Hilliard to Mali and visit the Dogon. And so these were some things that I brought back. So all those pieces up top here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces, not the one on the end, but all of these were Dogon pieces that I was able to bring back. And that was a tremendous trip. So I want to give praise to our ancestor, you know.
I wanted to kind of focus on these a little bit before we begin our interview. Kemet, can you kind of go into what some of these pieces are here and kind of their meaning and why?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing here is just a collection of carving statues of ancient Kemetu Necharu. And Necharu are principles and laws of nature. And so they're not gods and goddesses, you know, like Asar up here at the top. He represents all the kings of ancient Kemet. Asar was believed in mythology to be the first king, the first ruler of ancient Kemet. And he represents birth, resurrection, death, and reborn. And so when a king dies, he is Asar. And that's what they'll call him, like a Amen Asar. In their living form, they represent Haru, the great falcon. And so Haru is depicted a lot of times as the living ruler, becomes Haru. Inpu represents transformation in his Sahu, the mummification process. Khnum, with the ram's horn, represents the molder. He is the one that in the Quran and the biblical says man was molded from the black earth. Well, the molder is Khnum, and that comes from Sudan. In fact, almost all of these ancient Necharu have their origins in the south of Kemet, in the Sudan. And so as we go deeper into our lecture, I'll talk about that first, because Kemet owes its existence into the interior of Africa. I want to make sure people understand that Kemet is the mouthpiece of the African continent. Sometimes we forget, we glorify the lips and the mouth and forget about the body and the head and all the history that brought forth into Kemet. And so anyhow, these are just Necharu that represent principles, laws that talks about ancient Kemet. I'm going to be in the corner right here, man, boys.
I can call you doctor since I know you have a PhD. But again, I'd like to begin with Nubia. I'd like to get a better understanding of Nubia. Who who is the Nubian? Where do they come from? And what is their contribution to world civilization? And look at some of the specific things that are done. I know when we was in the exhibit on Nubia at the Boston Museum, you pointed out some artifacts that were made in Nubia thousands of years ago that the science really is only now catching up with. In fact, talk about Nubia first, but let's make that a part of.
Okay, I want to be real clear. First, I want to straighten up the terminology. When we use the word Nubia, there was no ancient place called Nubia. So I want us to understand. We've just adopted that as a modern name. Ancient Kash, which we call Kush, was probably the most famous name for that area in which would be modern day Sudan. And ancient Kush included the areas we call Monroe, Napata, going all the way up into what we call Ethiopia today, to the borders of the Red Sea. So all that area we call Sudan and Ethiopia was all part of ancient Kush, which again we call Kush. And this was the birthplace of ancient Kemet. We have to understand that as the last ice age ended about 12,000 years ago, about 10,000 BCE, and there was a golden age during this time period, but about maybe 90% of the world's population was destroyed. Some of the greatest minds and energy that we know of was also destroyed. But some of the high priests kept this information, and they resided in Eastern Africa. Eastern Africa, if you go to the area of Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, on the map was called Tanecha, which means the land of God, the land of the Creator. If you look at the land where Somalia is and Punt, this was also called Takui, the land of the great spiritual ancestors. And so even ancient Kemet always gave reference to this great area to the south from Central Africa. So names like Takui and Tanecha. Okay, so I need to be really, really clear. When they show approximately 7,000, 6,000, well maybe 8,000 BCE, and they have the great Anu chief that resided in that area maybe about 6,500 BCE. Again, coming from Tanecha and Takui, from the interior of Africa. And again, this is where your gold, almost all the gold, the natural minerals and resources came from south of Kemet. They were the ones that introduced in Netaplaya, which is in the, just west of Kemet, in Sudan, where Chad is. This was also a great area, because as the Nile dried up, the people from that area, as the Happy, as the Sudan, the Great Desert,
yes,
the Sahara
which
Desert dried up. As it dried up, people migrated to the Happy River, and the Happy River is the ancient name of the Nile River.
Okay.
So the Africans who lived in the Sahara, which would be like modern day Chad and that area there, and Niger, migrated. But they, in Netaplaya, they showed you that at 6,500 BCE, they had already understood Sirius A, Sirius B, had aligned astronomy and astrology charts and everything, aligning everything that we see that the pyramids are built upon. The alignment of the pyramids, that alignment was already done in Netaplaya prior to that time period. We also know that Haru M. Aketi, which people call the Great Sphinx, might have been built somewhere closer to about 12,000 BCE. And its alignment was already set more than 36,000 years. So just kind of giving you a little background of how far back, even at the Temple of Seti, they show you a group of Neteru rulers who go 36,000 years before dynastic Kemet. So the Happy Valley, just modern Kemet, what we call Egypt today, might have been reunited by Narmer about 4240 BCE. But the knowledge that will be in Kemet is ancient already on the African continent. And so we know that that information existed in the Sahara. We know that information existed further south. And we know that information exists all the way going as deep as South Africa. They are South African petroglyphs of the Ankh, of Ra, of Haru, that go back 100,000 years. Now, most people are not ready to deal with that because the question is always going to be, well, where was everybody else? Where were the Europeans 100,000 years ago? Not on the planet. Where were the Asiatics that we know today? 100,000, not on the planet. We were the only people on the planet. Various different types of Africans. And I want to make it clear, there are various different types of Africans. We put Africans into one group. The continent is huge, it's prodigious. And so there were many different types of Africans. And we give birth to we call the Twa people. The Twa, the Sankoi, San people, who later people call the Pygmies, the short people. They are the foundation and the stock of all African people. And in their folklore, the Twa say they were born in an luminous egg on top of the mountain of the moon. Now there are 3 mountains of the moons in Africa. The tallest mountain is Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. And it's actually the largest mountain in Africa. And is the largest freestanding mountain in the world. Most people don't know that. They think Mount Everest and all of those, but those are mountains, on top of cliffs and drifts. The largest freestanding mountain in the world is Kilimanjaro in Africa. And that's the mountain of the moon. Also, Mount Rwenzori in Uganda is the second mountain of the moon, which is also a source of the Nile River. And the third mountain of the moon is Mount Choco, in Ethiopia, where Lake Tena rests on top of it in a crater, and that is the source of the Blue Nile. And so we can see the contributors and the foundation of the longest river in the world, the Nile River, over 4,160 miles long, runs from the mountains of the moon. And later Dr. Ben would tell us that, the mountain of the moon was the source of ancient Kemet. And so here we can see that the source of this knowledge is running from there. And so now, let me just deal back with your original question of Nubia. Nubia, again, is a modern name, come from the word Nubu. Nub means gold. Ancient Kemet got most of their gold from Kash. And so they got so much gold from Kash that later people just start calling it the land of the gold. That's where Nubia comes from. And the people of the land, the people from the land of the gold, Nubians. But those are modern names. At one time it was called Ta-Nehesi. Okay, so Ta-Nehesi, Ta-Seti, Monroe, Napata. Those were actual kingdoms, that existed south of Egypt. And ancient Kush is older than ancient Kemet. In fact, all the artifacts, the whole idea of a Haru being the ruler, Shemsu Haru, the followers of Haru, that's an ancient Kemetic concept, ancient Kush concept. Haru was birthed in the south and brought in already completed, set up, its mythology, history, ancient, before the first so-called dynasty of ancient Kemet. So I need you to understand. The so-called white crown, red crown, we can see it on the Narmer palette. So that's at the very beginning of Kemet. Its spiritual system is already in place in ancient. The mythology of its Necharu, Kanun, Ptah, Amun, Ra, are already ancient before the first dynasty, so-called dynasty, because dynasties is kind of a misnomer. That's something that the Greeks later will superimpose into history. The Romans will solidify it, and then modern Europeans will classify all of Egypt through dynasties. Manetho was supposed to be the high priest of ancient Kemet during the Ptolemy reign. And when the Ptolemy wanted to know the history of the ancient Africans, since Manetho could speak Greek and Medu-Neter, he had all the records of the archives, because the Greeks closed the temples in ancient Kemet and moved all their stuff to Mennefer. And so Manetho had access to all the records of ancient Kemet, and he kind of classified Kemet into family groupings. So that's what a dynasty is. A dynasty is the family grouping. It's not a decade, like 10 years, or a century, like 100 years, or millennium, like 1,000 years. A dynasty could be 5 years, 50 years, 62 years, 500 years. A dynasty was a family rule or the rule of a consistent ideology. And so even if you were not connected to the family, if you were perpetuating the exact same ideology and concepts under the same forces, then that dynasty remained. If you could have been a same family member, but if you brought in a new concept, a new philosophy or ideology, then that was a change of dynasty. Okay, so there was approximately 31 dynasties up until the time of the Romans, and that's 30 BCE. But let me go back to Kush and Nubia. So again, when Narmer, you have to understand, the rule of Narmer came from ancient Kush, united upper and lower regions, and then called that area Kemet. And we have to be clear, Egyptologists have misled us. Kemet means the black community or the black nation state. It doesn't
Not
mean the
the
black
black
land.
land.
Ta is the word for land. They had a word for land that they affectionately used. They would call it Tameri. Tameri was another name. Dr. Ben likes to use that name. Tameri meant the beloved land. They also used the name Samatawi. I know my colleague and good friend Haru Ankara Samaj likes to use that. Samatawi. That means the united two lands. So those were three names that Egypt, the ancient names of Egypt, and that was Kemet, Tameri, and Samatawi. Those were three different names that ancient Egypt was known by African people with affection. Okay, but like I mentioned, all of the spiritual paraphernalia in ancient Kemet came from Kash, or the interior of Africa.
I just want you to clarify, when you talk about spiritual,
Right.
what are you talking about?
Religion was not created yet. I need you to understand. The Africans during that time did not have a religion. Religion is a concept that places your spiritual system in a box. And so that I can predict your behavior, I have an accountability to you, and I can dictate certain things to you. We had a spiritual system. Now, the 42 laws of Ma'at comes from even a greater group of laws that comes out of ancient Kush. Ma'at, the deity Ma'at, is an ancient Kush deity, an African woman with wings and wears an ostrich feather. The ostrich, often used by Amun, two ostrich plumes, is also a total African concept. The ostrich is an African bird. In fact, it's the largest bird in the world, but he does not fly. Okay? All right? But his plumes are almost in perfect symmetry. And if you ball it up, it'll spring right back. You know? And so it represents harmony and symmetry. So that's why they use this. So all the paraphernalia using your spiritual system based upon Ma'at. And so we had a spiritual system based upon Ma'at, which is truth, justice, righteous, harmonious balance, reciprocity. In my book, Spiritual Warriors or Healers, in chapter 3, the whole chapter 3 is dedicated to Ma'at. And I talk about Ma'at in all of its facets, whether it's Ma'at in the courtyard, in the courtroom, whether it's Ma'at dealing in the marketplace, or whether it's Ma'at in your spiritual understanding to nature, or whether it's Ma'at on how you treat your fellow human being. And in ancient Kemet, and in most of Africa, we treated each other like we were divine beings. So I often, when I write or in my book, so I autograph it, I say, we are divine spiritual beings having a divine human experience. And people understand that divine is used both ways. As divine beings, benevolent beings, and also as divine humans. We have taken divine out of it, and we're treating human beings like it's a disease or something fallible, you know, that's not on an extremely high level. But the ancient Kemetu always placed humans, black humans, on the highest esteem. In fact, when they wanted to give a human being the highest respect, they would depict him totally black. That was the top, that's the epitome of greatness, the essence of all things. Because all things comes from blackness. and returns to blackness. So when they wanted to show the greatness in a person, they depicted him totally black. Like Asar, the great black. Sometimes he was depicted green, but green and black are synonymous. Chlorophyll is to plants as melanin is to human beings. It is the essence of our existence. And so green and black is synonymous with the core of life. And so you'll see a lot of deities are green or black or various shades of brown. And melanin has the various shades of brown. Okay. People like to point out that the 25th dynasty was the only black rulership. Europeans like to bring this up. And even our friend Skippy Gates embarrassed us by when he did his television program by saying, yes, the black rulers of the 25th dynasty. And all the dynasties were black. I need to make that perfectly clear. Even when the Greeks, the Macedonians and Greeks ruled in the 35th dynasty, the people were still black, just the rulership. We had a mulatto and white Greek and Macedonian rulership under Ptolemies and Cleopatra, but the people and everything was still black. The engineers, the architects, the mathematicians, the priests were all still black. If we back up and talk about the Assyrians when they conquered Egypt, Egypt was still black. When the Persians came in, they were still black. You have to understand that even the Persian rulers who sat on the throne in ancient Kemet were still black. They were just ruling from a foreign ideology of Ma'at that the people were dealing with.
But the Persians were black?
The Persians were black. The Persian Empire is an offshoot of ancient Kash. You have to understand, ancient India and Persia and Syria, well, the original people there were called the Blackheads. Not because they had black caps, okay, blackheads. Okay, so if you look at their pantheon and their, you'll see the lion, the falcon. There's no lions in there. So that all comes from the East Africa. Even in China, you have the temple dolls of great lions. There's no lions there. And it wasn't like they died out. No, this was the Africans who brought this in. The first dynasty of China, the Shang dynasty. This is also an offshoot of Eastern Africa. So Kash gave birth to Kemet. Kash gave birth to ancient Babylonia. Kash gave birth to the Persian Empire. Kash gave birth to, I already mentioned, until later what we find out that you see in South Pacific is the Shang dynasty. Kash gave birth to the first emperors in Japan. Kash, the first shogun, is black from ancient Kash. I mean, so I want to show you ancient Kash, which we're not giving what you would call Nubia. That's what you're saying was Nubia. Later will become Aksum. And Aksum was never defeated. The greatest navy in the world. The Romans had to pay tribute to Aksum in order to travel in the Red Sea, and they needed Aksum Navy people to even navigate the Mediterranean totally free. And that's never brought up. In fact, we are the greatest maritime sailors in the world. So we needed even predecessors to the Moors. The Moors are just Africans. We need to be really clear. But ancient Kash did trade in Asia as far as China with elephants. You can't put elephants in the dugout. So you see large sea-going vessels. Even up until 1492 when Columbus sailed, the Europeans still didn't have large ships. It was the Moors sails, Moors ships, Moor navigators that even doing up until 1492 in the modern era. Still Africans who have a background coming from this area of ancient Kash. So we need to be clear. Even in ancient Kemet, they had battles with the so-called sea people and defeated them. And the sea people ravished all of Europe and the Mediterranean and was destroying everybody. And ancient Kash ancient Kemet, during their so-called second golden age, did battle with the sea people and devastated them. So I need to be really clear who we are and our origins. But ancient Kemet owes all of its records to the interior of Africa, the Medu Neter language, the Medu Neter writing, all of the Neteru comes from the interior of Africa. I need to be clear. The interior of Africa. So now as we move, at the beginning of the first golden age, some of my teachers were dynamic in breaking it down. So Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Sendretti, who we call Jacob Crothers,
Yes.
and all of them broke down, instead of using the dynastic periods that the Greeks and the Romans and later the modern day Europeans used, we broke Kemet into four golden ages. And so the first golden age is what you would call like the pyramid age. That's the beginning of when Narmer, Aha came in and reunified ancient Kemet. And we say reunified because obviously if Haru im Aketi was done 10,000 years ago, that was done by a unified, powerful nation.
How important is the Sphinx? I mean, is Haru Imketi, and talk a little bit about that artistic expression and how it was done.
Well, first of all, we know that it's perfectly aligned with the constellation of Leo the Lion, which takes place in that area around 10,000 BCE. And in order for that to happen again, you have to go back 36,000. And so it's possible that the alignment and astrology, all of that was laid out way before 10,000 BC. We're saying 10,000 BC because we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt it was already there when the last ice age took place. Great floods and water did water damage to that structure. So it was already there. Some people, some of my colleagues, we believe that it might be as much as 36,000 years old because it was put there to warn you of a time period, what was going to happen at the constellation of Leo. So no one built it during that time. It was already there when the constellation of Leo took place. And no one built it during when the Earth was going through a traumatic change. If the Earth is going through earthquakes, volcanoes, and storms, and you ain't out there chiseling the way building the Haru and Machete. It was already there.
How was it built? I mean, is it solid?
It's hewed out of one stone.
Huh.
And so that, and perfect symmetrically, 60 feet high, 240 feet long.
Is there anything on any carved structures on the earth today to match that? I mean, modern?
No, nothing in the modern world, you know.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You know. So you, and like I say, it's perfect symmetry. And we have to understand, like when it was recarved, now the head of Haru and Machete does not match the body. It is believed that the head was recarved after the ancient Kemetu reunified Kemet. Okay? So that's, you know, after Narmer and them. And it has a priest head. The high priest head, or they would call it the Nesubiti head. Okay? That's the head of the high priest. With the lion's body. And that meaning that master the animal domain. If the lion is the king of the animal domain, so master your animal nature, but rise to your highest spiritual consciousness, and that is of the high priest. And it sets there facing, you know, protecting like the pyramid complex from sunrise to sunset. And so that's where the Haru im Aketi, Haru protecting, you know, our legacy from sunrise to sunset. Now just think about it. The Sphinx is a mythological creature created by the Greeks that has wings and will kill you if you don't know the riddle. Right? So now, if you're in Haru im Machete represents the power of Haru, protecting Ra and all of his energy from sunset to from sunrise to sunset. So if your son said, "Dad, I want to be the Sphinx," you'd be like, "Whoa, wait a minute, son," because you're thinking about, you know, but he'll kill you if you don't know the riddle. So he's this monster. But if he says, "Dad, I want to be like Haru im Aketi. I want to protect our legacy from sunrise to sunset," you'd be like, "Oh, go with that, son. I can feel that," you know. So you can see just the difference of a name.
Absolutely.
The name made. And so when we call it the Sphinx, we're taking away our legacy. We're taking away the whole meaning of the statue. We're taking away what our ancestors put that there for. You know, we're taking all that away. You know. There's a complex next to Haru im Aketi, later reconstructed by Ka Ra. Right? And Inside of that structure, there are no corners to the building. Every there's rounded corners in the whole structure. There's no other structure in Kemet like that. This structure was built prior to ancient Kemet. Those stones are hewed, and there some of them are 20 weigh with 100 20 tons, 25 tons, placed in perfect symmetry, with no mortar or cement or chewing gum holding it together. And they are all rounded. It is believed it was a healing temple dealing with sound, so that you can use sound to heal and vibrate on all the major centers of the body. And through the voice and through sounds, you can do healing. Now that temple is more than 10,000. You don't hear anybody talk about that. Just like the Wasarian temple. So I need to mention these things before I even get deep into ancient Kemet. The Wasarian temple is built where Seti the first built his temple, which is the third golden age. He had to build his temple and cut it to a right angle. No other temple is like that, because in the construction he was going to run into the Asarian temple. It's another temple that is in perfect harmony and symmetry that was built maybe 10,000 years ago.
What were temples built for? What was the purpose?
Temples were like universities. They were so get temple like church out of your mind. Remember, no church, no religion. The temples in ancient Kemet were repositories of the knowledge of the people at that particular time. And so inside of the temple was an accumulation of all the knowledge that the people had mustered at that particular time. And so when you have these temples that are perfectly aligned with astrological symbols and astronomy, within the sky, it lets you know that the builders of this temple had knowledge of the sky, had already mapped the sky out. And now they were like, so is above, so below. We're building a temple that was in total harmony with what was going on in the heavens, in terms of sunrise, the sunset, in terms of the constellations, and so these people are putting their accumulated knowledge inside of this building. Now people will say, well, why would you have blocks that are 25 tons? That's enormous. Why would you have something so difficult? See, we're using a Western mindset to define an African spiritual system. You're only using 3 to 10% of your brain. These people were using 50 to 100% of their brain. So you can't even comprehend what they were doing. Obviously, if they hewed blocks 25 tons, that wasn't a difficult thing for them. Like the Stonehenge. The Europeans didn't have nothing to do with Stonehenge. Those were still Africans who put all that together. And putting those blocks up there was not as difficult as people want to believe. The thing about at the Wasarian is that there is no Medunecha on any of the walls. The only symbol found on this temple that could be 10,000 years old is the golden mean, the golden flower, which is symbolic of the mathematical formula and structure of all life on the planet Earth.
Yeah, very important, because that has a relationship to time, and time is an intellectual concept. Speak, please.
Well, the Fibonacci code, they call it Fibonacci today. Today it's the golden mean, which is 1.61, okay, which is more sophisticated than pi, okay. Pi, the formula for pi was done by people who were like in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, okay. All the structures were based on the golden means. That gives you perfect proportions of everything. So I just want to make it, the golden mean was known to these Africans more than 10,000 years ago. So I just need you to understand. The structure of a pine cone, the structure of a flower, the structure of a seashell is all based on the golden means. The human cell is how it divides and all based upon this formula. So they knew the proportion. The reason why all the monuments were in perfect symmetry, that the golden mean shows you that the proportion from your forehead to your nose to your bridge here to there is the same proportion on your finger from here to here to here to here, which is the same proportion on your body from here to here, which is the same proportion from your hip to your knee to your ankle, the same proportion on your foot. So your head size, your hand size, and your foot size are all proportionally the same size. A good tailor, if he knows your glove size, he knows your head size and your shoe size. This is all known in golden mean. So they would put up a grid based upon that. And so whether the statue was 1 inch or whether the statue was 60 feet high, like at Aksum, an apple symbol done by Ursa Ma'at Ra, who they call Ramses II, it's in perfect symmetry. Perfect symmetry. It's 60 feet high. Perfect symmetry. And not only that, at apple symbol, there you have, and most of the temples had a similar structure where you had an outer court, inner court, and then the Holy of Holies. And usually they would have libraries on both sides of the Holy of Holies. This would be symbolic of the human body. You have your outer court, your inner court, and then your holy sanctuary, where your Holy of Holies is in here, where your pineal and pituitary gland are housed. And so your temple would be set up also like that. And the temple at Waset and at Karnak shows you that. They call it the Temple of Man. Showing up, and it's basically set up just like the human body. But let me go back to Aksum. In Aksum, inside of the Holy of Holies, there are 4 statues aligned inside, so that when Ra hits during a certain time period, during the equinox and the solstice, the light travels through the 3 rooms into the Holy of Holies and hits each one of the Necharu all the way to the ruler, who at that point was Ursa Ma'at Ra Satepin Ra. And this, so the astronomers, the engineers of ancient Kemet during the 3rd Golden Age understood the 2 solstices and the 2 equinox, how light emanated on this planet, where the sun rose, and exactly what angle it would hit to build a temple that they had to carve into the mountain. They didn't put blocks up. They carved this into the mountain perfect. Just like in Lalibela in Ethiopia, where you have the rock churches carved out of a single mountain into perfect symmetry, into the cross. So we didn't lose this science. I want you to understand. Even when Kemet fell, and we had the Greeks and the Roman encroachment, and many of the African scholars just moved further south. And so you will have Monroe, and they will go all the way to the Common Era. And not some of them won't be destroyed until the Islamic conquest around 640 BCE. AD, CE, in the Common Era. And so the ingenuity of the African mind still existed.
Aksum, the rock-hewn churches. I've been there, but I couldn't really understand it because they connected it to Christianity, and they couldn't tell me when it was built. There was just such a lack of information that I got all the footage, but I can't explain it.
Right. You'll see the Tekken with false doors in it for the spirit world. So in Lalibela and in Ethiopia, you have Tekkens that go up 100 feet high, just like in ancient Kemet. And the Tekken is what they call the obelisk. Me and Dr. Jeffries did a dynamic tape edited by, done by...
I've seen it.
Yeah, you saw that, right,
it's
on the
called
Tekken.
the Tekken.
Right, it's called the Tekken. And we showed that the Tekken is a phallic symbol, a male phallic symbol.
Right.
But it represents resurrection and rebirth that was placed in front of each of the temples of ancient Kemet. Remember, the temple is a repository of your accumulated knowledge up until that point. And so we're not knowing that. It's a university. It's a university that doesn't need a teacher. It's a university when you walk in and look at the angles of the wall, when you look at how the windows are aligned, when you look at how the roof was aligned in the observatory, when you look at the columns, then when you start to read the glyphs, it's all right there. Thousands of years of stored information is in each temple, from the mathematics and the science. I want to make this statement. See, science is spirituality that can be seen, measured, and proven. Spirituality is science that cannot be seen, cannot be measured, cannot be proven by physical entities, but can be felt. And so whether it is spiritual or whether it is scientist, you can feel it. One is seen and one cannot be seen. But they both are based upon the same mathematical ingenuity that the Africans held and gave birth to the rest of the world.
Because we are talking about the spirituality that gave birth to the calendar, I've always wondered, because time is involved in a calendar, how that came about and just the importance of it. Because we don't really understand what the Africans went through to develop time. Time is an intellectual concept.
Sure.
So you have to have a juxtaposition of the movement of the cosmos and the universe and the sun and the moon and everything to come up with a correct representation of that movement with time. It's like a universal joint in your car. The motor turns, the wheels turns, but it's all turning in perfect harmony.
Yes, we understood, you have to understand too, we understood this phenomenon going back more than 100,000 years. That's before most people, that's before we even populated the planet. We understood this concept. Okay, so you have to understand, the first star charts are created by Africans. And when Kemet comes into existence and Kosh comes into existence, the star chart is already ancient.
How can you tell? How can you prove that?
We can prove, okay, first of all, Nataplier shows a constellation, a star in the sand, showing the alignment of Sirius A and Sirius B. And it shows where the equinox and the solstice were, 6500 BCE. That's 2,000 years before the birth of ancient Kemet. So all the science that we have in ancient Kemet is in Nataplier, in the desert, in the Sudan, right there. And then those people, as the Sahara dried up, just migrated into Kemet. So we see where this information comes from. But it goes beyond that. If you go to South Africa, if you go to Zimbabwe, the pyramids, they have pyramids there that are aligned with the pyramids in Kemet.
In Zimbabwe?
Did you hear that? Yes. In Zimbabwe and in South Africa. There are pyramids that are aligned with the great pyramids in Giza.
That are older?
Yes. It's going to blow you away. That are 100,000 years old. I know. I'm going to give you some information. I'm going to pull out some books. I'm going to show you. We're going to have a break. I'm going to pull this out so you can see it. And petroglyphs, like I said, of the Ankh. 100,000 years old. You know, there's carvings, and it just shows you that we've had this technology. And not only there, they also, just like at Nataplier, have an astrological setting on the ground with stones set up just like in Nataplier, showing the constellation of Sirius A, Sirius B, and the rotation of the solstices and equinox as it relates to the Earth. 100,000 years ago. So we have Nataplier 6,500 years ago, 6,500 BCE. That's just an offshoot. It shows the migrations of Africa from East Africa and Southern Africa, East Africa migrating, because there was a great civilization in the Sahara. Okay, but as that dried up, then people migrated either further west and north, or they moved towards the Happy Valley. All right, so I'm just gonna just touch upon that. When we have a break, I'm gonna pull some of those books out so that you can see that. But now let me just say this. So we've mentioned, for example, in Seti's temple, that we had recorded 3 sun years. A sun year is approximately 26,000 years. Now, in order to record a sun year, that's the sun moving through the constellation of the 12 houses, you need a science already in place to calculate this.
Correct.
How long have you had the science? Wait a minute. If you recorded 3, before you did the first one, you must have been recording for thousands of years, even to get to the point where say, oh, we're gonna pinpoint this until it comes back to that point again. So I'm trying to show you here that the whole concept of a time, of a calendar, and we've been using, I mean, even in ancient Kemet, you had a lunar calendar, a solar calendar. You had the solar calendar and the lunar calendar, and a third calendar, because they had another calendar that dealt with the astrological phenomena. They had a calendar for festivals, and then they had a calendar for political and taxation, you know, agricultural. Mm-hmm. So they had an agriculture. So they simultaneously they had these three calendars going in ancient Kemet. The Romans, like Augustus, had Kemet priests come to Rome and put their calendar together. So they just took a Kemetic calendar and put Roman names on it. So August was for Augustus, Octavia for Octavius, Julius Caesar for July. You know, so that's all we did. You know, was the Kemetic priests just took a Kemetic calendar and Greek and Romanized it. That's all. All right, so I need to be clear. No Western people developed a calendar. We are the authors of that concept of time. You know, as we're tracing the movement of the stars and plotting it. So before ancient Kemet, that was already ancient. That wasn't developed in Kemet. These priests brought this knowledge in. See, what people fail to realize, even the building of the three in Giza, Menkaure, Ka-Efra, and Khufu, the three large pyramid complexes, yes, are aligned with Sahu, who they call Orion's belt. Right? Orion is Sahu, okay, from ancient Kemet. And it's aligned with his belt. So, and have those pyramids in that exact same order, they already knew that that what was going on in the sky. So was above, so below. And then the so-called air dunks, which you don't need air dunks in a pyramid where ain't nobody living in there. So those are not, those are shafts that point to various constellations in the sky. So the builders of that, and let me say this, all the major pyramids that were done in ancient Kemet were built on ancient sites that was already spiritual and holy. There are megaliths in Senneferu, like Senneferu was the father of Khufu, who built 3 pyramids. The bent pyramid, the red pyramid, the true pyramid. If you go inside of the bent pyramid, if you go inside of, not the bent, I believe the red pyramid, if you go inside and you go in the chamber, you'll find almost in the center of that pyramid, there's another room with big monolithic stones that were weathered by water, just like Haru and Machete. Now, it hasn't rained there for 10,000 years like that. How would stones inside of the pyramid get water weathered?
Right.
So, in other words, there was a structure there before they built the pyramids that was ancient, that was damaged during the last ice glacier about 10,000 years ago. Senneferu built his pyramid on top of that site because it was already a sacred, holy site that the people were already coming to. Right. Are you starting to feel my drift?
Yes.
And if we go and if we examine many of these other great pyramids, we'll find the same phenomena. So even the Kut of Khufu, that the hallway inside the first causeway is not the same age as the outside of that building. And that temple was that pyramid was supposed to have been built within a 20-year period. No, there's literally hundreds of years separating the interior of that building from the exterior of that building. No one talks about that. And the interior of that building is also aligned with particular astrological symbols in the sky. That's another DVD. We won't talk about that on this one. So I just want to show you. See, we can talk just on the science of ancient Kemet. The Western world is still trying to prove what the ancient Kemetu already knew. It's like when I was with Asa Hilliard, And the German Egyptologists were like, well, how did the Dogon, they're not even supposed to know this stuff. How do they know, Sigweed, that Sirius B is only visible every 60 years? You know, and they've been doing this dance for, what, 1,000 years? How do these people know that? Some smart Europeans must have came here and told them.
That's what they said.
You know, and the Europeans don't know that. Just in the with the powerful telescope they have in Hawaii and California, in the last 30 years, they've just been able to see Sirius B. And the Dogon, let me just put them in the proper perspective, come from ancient Kemet. They are one of the last groups that migrate from the Happy Valley during the influx of the Arab and Islamic invasion of Eastern Africa. The Dogon took their knowledge after all the temples were totally closed by the Romans, and then they just made their move. And they moved to an area that nobody would want. They're in the most desolate area of the mountain desert. So you're saying somebody lives there? They didn't want to be bothered by anybody. You know, they didn't want to encroach on a land that other Africans were living in. And they definitely wanted to escape Islamic conquest. And so they moved into an area that they can, first of all, they can see if anybody's coming. It's protected. Their warriors can defend it. And it's a land that nobody really wants. You know, so, you know, but the Dogon had this area, and there's no group that we know of today on the planet Earth as an ethnic group where that group has more information of astronomy and astrology as the Dogon, other than what was in ancient Kemet. And they come directly from ancient Kemet.